Thanks so much for joining us here on the Daily Racing Form YouTube. I'm Gino Buccola alongside David Aragona. We're going to head out west to Santa Anita for opening day. December the 26th, usually one of the biggest racing days of the year. And David, I have to say, I was very impressed with the card that they've drawn for opening day this year at Santa Anita. We're going to take a look at the Laffit Pincay Jr. Stakes, which is renamed for one of the greatest of all time when it comes to riders. But this is a strong card with 6 consecutive graded stakes races to end the card.
Yeah, kind of funny. The American Graded Stakes Committee weighed in last week about validating the grades of all these races, and there was some griping about that from me included, but then Santa Anita came right back with the response of carding really strong editions of all of these races, including this first running of the Grade 2 Laffit Pincay Jr. Stakes, I believe this formerly the San Antonio.
So big field is what you'll see throughout the Santa Anita card on opening day. This 6th race we're going to take a look at is the Grade 2 Laffit Pincay Jr. And it did take a hit with a couple of the horses who would have been major players in here, like the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile winner, Full Serrano and Skinner. They would have been running here, but they're going to be rerouted. So we have a competitive group, David, but no real standout in here. A couple of years ago, Express Train would have been even money in a spot like this, but he hasn't won since 2022. And after that, you don't have a whole lot of graded stakes winners, but it makes for a pretty wide open, I thought, a pretty competitive betting race here.
Yeah, we talk about the strength of a lot of these races on Saturday. As you kind of note, this one may be falling a little bit short, but it's certainly an interesting race to handicap. It's a competitive affair coming in. Somebody's going to have to step forward to win a race at this level because they all look just a cut below Grade 2 quality at this point. You mentioned Express Train being the class of this field, but he does have a lot to prove now, third off the layoff, trying to get back to that former top form.
Let's take a look at what the Timeform US Pace Projector thinks about this field. No surprise to see Tarantino out front. Interesting horse, David, who won 2 of his first 3 starts, was 2nd in the Holy Bull, 4th in the Fountain of Youth. And then he went on a stretch where he was 0 for 19, but then he's kind of rounded back into form in his last few, and they've been really aggressive. They've sort of changed tactics and been very adamant with getting him to the front end under Edwin Maldonado.
Yeah, he was claimed by Peter Urton 4 starts back for $40,000, and he's really turned his life around since then. As you said, has shown a lot more early speed, and you would imagine the plan is going to be to go to the front with him. And we'll see how much pressure he gets from horses like Ashcraft or JB Strikes, who are both stepping up against stakes companies. So we'll see if they can handle this level.
Let's take a look at the field, and we'll meet them inside throughout, starting with the number 1, American Admiral. This horse was a stakes winner at Pleasanton last time out. Thought it was a fine effort where we actually beat Lamas in this field, and Lamas is a multiple graded stakes winner. And when you start to dive into his form, he has 95 and 98 buyer speed figures. Those would put him right in the mix if he can get back to one of his better efforts. 3rd start off the bench. There are just no monsters in this race, David. So I kind of started to warm up to him more and more as I looked at this field. Even when you look back at his form in 2023, he's behind Practical Move and New Grange. That was a short field, but that was a good group with the multiple graded stakes winners in 1st and 3rd there. So I think he has a shot to at least hit the board in here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him take one more step forward, 3rd start of the form cycle.
Yeah, I started to warm up to this horse when I was looking through his races, especially watching that last race at Pleasanton, because the margin was just a half length between he and Lamas, but I thought he ran a much better race, going wide around both turns and making that early move to challenge at the top of the stretch and got the job done that day. I think he's going to have to run significantly better than that to beat this field, but he did take a big step forward from his 1st start to 2nd start off the layoff. So now 3rd off the layoff, maybe there's another move forward coming. I still think he would need to run better than he ever has in stakes company to beat a field like this, but he will be a price.
The number 2, Ashcraft, began his career earlier on in the Wesley Ward barn and has now recently changed to the John Sadler barn. And that's where we started to see some of his best work when he came out west. But he has an 8-month layoff to deal with. If we were talking about this race in May or in June when he was in really good form, I would probably elevate him quite a bit, David. But now I have some questions because it's going to be his first time versus stakes company, coming off of an 8-month layoff, having to deal with a 1.16 distance that we've never seen him successful at. I think those are a lot of kind of nitpicks or concerns that I may have for him at probably not the biggest price in the world either.
Yeah, a lot of questions. Also moving into a new barn for the first time,
Yeah.
now trained by John Sadler, formerly with Bob Hess, where he had all of his success. And I never like to see that when horses sort of reach their peak form and then disappear for a
Yep.
period of months, and now they're coming back. You wonder if something really went wrong with the horse for him to need that time off after appearing to be doing so well in his races. So they picked an ambitious spot for him to come back in this Grade 2 event, and he's got tactical speed in a race that doesn't feature a ton of front runners. But as you said, there are questions to answer. And with that strong series of recent races, I wonder what kind of price he's going to be.
JB Strikes Back has won 2 in a row against Softer, so will step up and face Stakes Company for the first time. Did beat a couple of next out winners in his most recent race. A horse named Wendelson, who came back to win an allowance race with a 97 buyer speed figure, and beat a horse that came back to win a 50 non-winners of 2 next time out. What do you think about JB Strikes Back looking for his 3rd win in a row?
Yeah, you can make a case that he faced some decent company in the last race, but it is still a pretty big step up in class for him to have beaten starter allowance, a foes 2 back, and then first level allowance. That's a big jump up to now grade 2 level. And we mentioned this probably isn't your typical grade 2 race. There are some horses that kind of need to prove themselves at this level, but JB Strikes Back is one that just has to get a bit faster to hang with a group like this.
Express Train is a grade 1 winner, 5-time graded stakes winner, and he won this race back in 2021 when it was the San Antonio, but now he's a 7-year-old. He has not won since March of 2022, so he's 0 for his last 5. He had a year-and-a-half break, returned to the races in April, so he raced in April, then in July, then you have some time off again. Seems like there's a little bit of gaps here and there in the work. You see from August 24th to October 3rd, there's a big gap that was probably like 6 weeks or so. So again, class wise, if he showed up with probably a B plus effort, that might be good enough to beat a group like this. I just don't know how much we can expect from him right now at this point, David.
Yeah, he's just awfully hard to trust at this point. I mean, obviously, there was a time when he would have been odds on against a field like this in top form when he won, grade 1 races on this circuit back in 2022. But the long, long layoff, I mean, he raced at the end of his 5-year-old season, and now he's nearly an 8-year-old, and he's only run twice since then. You mentioned the gaps between his recent races, using recent in quotation marks because they've been a while ago now. I just wanted to see a bit more finish from him in the San Diego when it seemed like he was going to be a threat at the quarter pole, and then he just flattened out and didn't have any finish. And he's going to have to run a bit better than that here.
Lamas is a really fun horse to root for. This horse always shows up with a very good effort. Doesn't matter what the surface is, dirt, synthetic, turf, just puts out a very, very nice account of himself each and every time. He was just second best last time out, but he is a multiple graded stakes winner. One of his big wins came when he beat field in the grade 3 San Francisco, which was a really solid field earlier this year in April. How do you think Lamas fits with this group?
You mentioned, his dirt form translating pretty well between the surfaces, obviously having most of his success on turf and synthetic. And while he's run well on the dirt, they've all come at the California fair tracks up north.
Yeah.
And I just doubt how that form translates to Southern California. I'm a little more willing to trust a horse like American Admiral coming out of that same race because at least he's got the proven form in Southern California, whereas Lamas does not. So he's got some things to prove to me.
One race that may stick out a little bit is when he defeated Mixto, who we saw come back and win the Pacific Classic. So if we were able to show up with that kind of race, and those form lines would play pretty well in here. One horse who Mixto actually defeated is the grade 2 placed Katona. It just feels like this is a nice spot for him, David. He's been in against some of the better, the absolute tip-top cream of the crop out on the West Coast, and there just aren't any of those horses in here. You look at his last few races in the California Crown, he was 35-1. He finished 4th, but the 3 horses in front of him, any one of them in this spot would be heavily favored and heavily backed. So it just feels like he's faced better as of late. The blinkers come on. They're going to try to get him a little more forwardly placed and just a little more focused early in the race. I would not be shocked to see him right there at the top of the stretch and having every say in this thing. I think he's one of the major players here.
I completely agree. I think he's the one horse that just fits this race really well. You mentioned him facing some tougher company earlier this year. I think he was even trying some distances that are a little far for him. The Pacific Classic, he doesn't strike me as a horse that wants any part of 1.25 miles. He's more of a miler type. I think the 1.16 miles of this distance race is going to be just fine for him. And he ran well last time in that Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. He was never going to finish in the money that day, but he did have to alter course a little bit in upper stretch and was finishing on well at the end. They're putting the blinkers on, down, so probably hoping to get him a little bit closer to the pace in here, which I don't mind at all, and just seems like a horse who's doing well at the moment and is a top contender.
Yeah, had the same sort of notes. If you look at that Breeders' Cup race, he kind of got stopped. He was never going to win, but would he have finished much closer? Yeah, and that race probably looks better on paper, and he's probably a shorter price at that. Tarantino, one of the more solid horses in this field right now, when you're just looking at those last three races from the $40,000 claimer and then stepping up, beating an allowance group and a good runner-up effort in the native diver in a race that had a good amount of early speed in there. He kind of won the battle of the speeds. In fact, at one point, he was kind of back to third and then sort of came on again. So I thought this was a pretty good effort, and he's obviously improved quite a bit for the new connections.
Yeah, if you're at the track on Thursday, don't rip up your tickets if this horse comes under a ride around the far turn, because
Yep.
that often happens, and he just has a way of finding more. As you see here, it looks like he's going to finish third, but he just keeps plugging away, comes back on for second. It was a similar story too back when he won that allowance race at Santa Anita. Looked like he was beaten in mid-stretch and then came back to beat Imagination on the wire. So he's a really game horse, and he tries hard and responds to that pressure from his jockey. I just wonder if horses like that are going to keep finding more as they have to kind of go to the bottom of the well in every race. But he is doing well right now for the Peter Urton barn and supposed to get the right kind of trip towards the front end.
On the outside, Golden Eye rounds out the field. He's been best on the turf. That's where 3 of his 4 career wins have come. But even his strongest races on the grass would be below what most of these have done so far. The last dirt race was in July 2023, so he hasn't been on the dirt in a stretch of like 13 races or so. But you will allure Flavian Pratt to this one, so you have to take that as a positive. What do you think about Golden Eye in here?
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about his form with regard to surface is that when he was running on the dirt back in the early part of his career, his turf races were no better than his dirt races. They were kind of equal speed figures on each surface, maybe even a little bit better on the dirt. And now he's just improved overall as a racehorse, especially in the past 3 starts, stepping up to those buyers in the high 80s. The problem is, even that form, if he translates it back to dirt, doesn't really make him a contender in here. And he's a horse that has some early speed, but is drawn outside of his uncoupled Peter and stablemate and Tarantino, who also has speed. So I just kind of wonder what kind of trip is coming for him, and he looks a little overmatched to me.
Well, let's take a look at how the selections will go for this race that kicks off an all-graded stakes pick 6. David, you put Katona on top. I think a super solid horse, and you can see you and I have the same top 3 horses, just in a slightly different order.
Yeah, I was kind of stuck between Katona and Tarantino for my top pick, and I just feel like Katona's the class of the race, dropping a little bit and putting the blinkers on. Hopefully he gets the right kind of trip in mid-pack. He just seemed like the right one to take, and I don't have any illusions he's going to be that much of a price in here.
Yeah, a lot of the times you can tell when I'm putting together selections on our race previews, I'll use the horses that I think are kind of the horses to beat those measuring sticks in like the 2nd and 3rd spots and see if we can get creative with the price on top. And that's what I did here with American Admiral on top of Tarantona and Katona, who I think are very, very solid and probably the most likely winners of this race. And then what do you do with a horse like Express Train? Who knows what kind of price he will be up there. But 1765 for me, 6714 for David. However you're playing them in the Laffit Pincay Jr., we wish you the best of luck on opening day at Santa Anita.